the Sian and Tammara show, and it's the fourth day of the GPPAC Pacific RSG meeting.
And today there was a lot around the actual planning of activities that are going to happen in the next year.
Yes, that's right, and a lot of what's on the mind of the RSG members is making sure that they're using the platforms that already exists for the work that needs to be done. So it's just basically making use of resources that we have, making do with what you have.
Right, like there's so many different kinds of platforms, there's so many meetings coming up, and it's about using the meetings that are coming up and maybe doing preparatory meetings as well for the people that they're trying to reach, so that while we as CSOs aren't able to access the actual meeting, it's important to have input beforehand, so it gives, for example, states and IGOs something to think about when they go and represent perhaps the country at certain kinds of meetings. And so that in itself is, it lends itself to the different roles that each member of the RSG plays. It's not just about duplication, but it's also looking at every different organization has its own different focus. And when you keep the focus, you keep an eye on the issues that are coming up, because we all can't reach everybody, so that's why it's nice to have a range of different organizations within the RSG.
That's right, and not to mention the whole network, such as acknowledging and supporting organizations, while making sure that while donors and state bodies aren't the only ones setting the agenda. Yesterday, Thomas Shanahan from UNDP Pacific, he mentioned a lot about this. He emphasized that about going and lobbying to donors and making sure that they set out their agenda before going to the donors, making sure that they know what they want, so they're going in and requesting the donors of how they can help to implement the plans that they have.
That's right. IGOs and government departments, we always worry that they're going to be the ones shifting the agenda, because they are the ones with, for example, the money, so they have the spending power. But it's the CSO's responsibilities to be the ones to say, these are the issues and you can't lose sight of them. Because a lot of what happens is they decide that they're going to compartmentalize the every year. Like this year we're looking at this because, for example, there was a lot of focus around environmentalism a couple of years ago because it was the year of the forests. And so those kind of campaigns, such as planting a tree for every person, those kinds of campaigns have sort of faded into the background because that's what's disappeared. A lot of what the focus is on, for example, this year, in light of the recent floods, is disaster risk management. And, of course, that's something that should have been thought about and had been thought about for so long beforehand. But, you know, they're only sort of looking at doing things around that. And I'm just speaking about Fiji specifically. But, you know, the shifting of the focus, for example, Rio +20, it got everyone sort of hyped up. You know, we got to look at sustainable development. But now that Rio +20 has come and gone, that sort of focus on sustainable development seems to have gone as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So I guess it's about addressing all the issues and talking about it openly until the issue has been resolved. There's also the multiple levels and channels we need to engage at to get the message to as many people as we can. So it's, like you mentioned earlier, not just focusing on one group, but generally addressing the whole group as everyone. And I guess that's like one of the things we tend to forget about, and also like how you were saying earlier, donors. So they would want everyone to just focus on this specific task. So everything else basically is forgotten about, and no one talks about it until the following year. So it's very important to address all the issues around us, because there are a lot of contributing factors.
And particularly if there's sensitive issues, because sensitive issues come up even fewer than general issues anyway. And those are the ones that need to be brought up to the surface, particularly because they're sensitive. No one wants to talk about it. It's all hush-hush, even though it's happening.
Yeah, that's right, Sian. That was raised at dinner. We were having dinner last night at Sitar. I'm saying it right, aren't I?
Yeah.
Because we can't pretend like there's no corruption or human trafficking or even drugs in the Pacific, particularly here in Fiji. Listening to Helen, she mentioned earlier, everything's been going on, and we were like, oh my gosh, so you see it happening.
Yeah.
And then last night we heard about it. So it's also happening here in Fiji, but then no one's just talking about it. It's still under the surface, while Bougainville is on the surface. It's things that everybody see every day. So yeah, so we have to, I guess, they say ignorance is bliss. So we have to take that away and stop being ignorant and living in a blissful life, even though we would love to, but then now we don't have to. We have to face reality, as harsh as it sounds.
And you need to get as many people as you can engaged to address these kinds of issues, because when these things are brought to the surface and you're addressing them rather, and everyone knows about it and everyone knows that it's wrong, the more eyes around the place that are more critical and they realize that this is not what you do, then it's most likely that's what's going to be able to, decrease these kinds of things happening, because we do worry about the safety of our people in Fiji and in the Pacific, because a lot of what's happening is these are the people coming from outside the Pacific, and well, there's no other way to say it. It's exploitation, basically, because we're in such a position where our economic standing is really, really bad, you know.
Disadvantaged.
So basically, people will do whatever they need to make money, and sometimes that can cloud their judgment. That can also, in the worst case scenario, you're basically selling your children, which happens in PNG, Solomons, and Bougainville. There are families that are selling their daughters to the mines as basically as sex slaves, because they can't afford to send them to school or to keep them in the village.
And on that note, also like how girls are being sold and then they find them and then they bring them back. So those who are actually selling those girls go back and compensate, paying the families 1,400 or 1,000 or 10,000 kinas to the family with 406 pigs, and the list goes on. And that's really sad. Putting up advertisements, there's job opportunities in greener pastures you can find, but then when you only go, it
turns out that it's not an actual job.
Job that you might be dreaming of. And so I guess the last thing we can remember is that communication is the most important thing. So it's not just about me talking to Sian, but also her talking to me and having a clear and effective communication. And also, I guess, like, we tend to think that communication is just talking. But it's a lot
about action, taking action as well, and collaborative action, which is really, really effective. And we as CSOs and just basically we as people cannot afford to fall out of contact with each other.
Exactly. And also, your non-verbal cues, paying attention to someone, addressing the issue, asking, going with follow-up questions and all those stuff. Those all important, and also the types of language that you use.
Because we work in so many different contexts, you need to know the different language. Like, say I'm talking to you. This is kind of how I talk to you anyway.
Yes,
but
I know.
Let's say that we're actually addressing a formal meeting. We can't talk like this because we have to use language such as
the certain terminologies,
mediation, outputs and outcomes. There's also looking at
transparency.
What's the name? The border partners. You're looking at border partners. Border partners are basically the people that
boundary partners.
Boundary partners.
Boundary partners.
Boundary sounds like border. So see, like, it's
not words like that.
Exactly our forte. But that's the kind of thing that we have to learn how to do to some extent. Because we are glad to be part of this network.
Yes, we are
but,
very much.
It is challenging from time to time.
And then you can see, that organization in PNG.
Regional
intergovernmental organizations. So there are certain terminologies that you use when in a certain context.
SIDS. Even then, some people forget. The IGO language, which is the Intergovernmental Organizations. Those are like the UN and other sorts of groups like that. They're the kind of people that are the most difficult to talk to sometimes because they live and breathe policy language. CSOs, we get a little bit more leeway because particularly us, we work at a more of a community level. And that's a lot more fun. But when you're trying to speak to a UN representative,
Yeah.
and they start talking to you about,
Like,
indicators and preventative measures. Yeah, I get those ones, but
yes.
for things
There are
like
other ones.
you're talking about, so we're a Rigo, and we're concentrating on the sort of economical impacts of human trafficking on SIDS, and it's like, okay, so you're looking at people being moved from place to place, the transnational and other
In
things.
small Pacific
Small island developing states. So that's basically us. And then you have PSIDS, which is even more us because it's the Pacific Small Island Developing States, because you have a whole bunch of other ones. There's lots of acronyms, but we're glad that we don't have to use them all the time.
Yes, we are, because then it'll be difficult to communicate with those at the community level.
Yes. So having to translate that is really important, and so that's the importance of communication in our work.
Yes, Shan. So I guess that basically wraps up everything today.
Yes. Thank you very much for joining us here in the Femlink Mobile. We have been filming from day 2 in the car, because it's the only place that's quiet, because tourists make a lot of noise.
Yeah.
And we're glad for them coming here, but they do make a lot of noise.
Too much.
Yeah, so thank you for joining us for the Sian and
Tammara show.
We'll be back with more soon.